Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some fascinating stuff today. It's all about boundaries, specifically boundaries in dating.
Oh yeah, boundaries. Everyone loves that word.
Well, love it or hate it, we got to talk about it, especially when it comes to relationships, am I right?
Definitely.
We're looking at excerpts from Boundaries in Dating by Henry Cloud and John Townsend.
Good stuff.
It is. It really gets you thinking about how you approach dating and honestly, how to just approach, relationships better in general.
Yeah, it's not just for like the single folks out there.
That's a good point. The book kicks off by saying that dating, well, it can be good, obviously,
Sure.
but especially if you're not approaching it maturely, there can be some risks,
Yeah, some bumps in the road.
like a lot of bumps.
Exactly. It's kind of like, driving a car. Driving itself isn't a bad thing.
Right.
But if you're not being responsible, if you're not a mature driver, you're going to have some issues.
Fender benders, or even worse.
Exactly. Some folks, maybe they even need to take a break from dating altogether, just to do some work on themselves before they get back behind the wheel, so to speak.
I love that analogy. So where do boundaries fit into all of this, with this whole dating thing?
Well, the book argues that boundaries are really the key to making dating safe and fruitful,
Yeah.
so you get something good out of it.
Right. Like it's not all just about avoiding bad stuff.
Exactly. They do two main things. The first, well, they define you.
Oh, okay. Define me. How?
Imagine like a big neon sign
Uh-huh.
broadcasting your values, your beliefs, and those non-negotiables, those things you just won't budge on.
Okay, I'm picturing that sign. What would it say? Give me an example.
All right, so let's say you meet a woman who's upfront about her faith,
Hmm.
like right from the
Hmm.
start. She makes it clear that's super important to her.
Gotcha.
She's letting you know, hey, this is core to who I am.
Right off the bat, you're screening for compatibility.
Exactly. And the second thing boundaries do, well, they protect you.
Oh, okay. Protection.
It's like, having a good fence around your emotional garden.
I like that. Keeping the weeds out.
Exactly. Letting the good stuff grow.
Yeah, because dating can be really vulnerable, can't
Oh,
it?
absolutely. You're opening yourself up.
Yeah, it's like opening the gates to your heart, and you got to be careful who you let in.
Right. And speaking of being careful, the book really stresses learning from those past dating patterns. They don't want you repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
Oh man, tell me about it. Like, can we just skip those dating deja vus, please?
Right. They tell this story about Jim. He was stuck in this rut, pursuing women who were, more into him than he was into them.
Okay.
Like he was playing it safe, afraid to really put himself out there.
So he was settling.
Yeah, settling
Yeah.
for those lukewarm connections instead of going after what he truly wanted.
Do you think he even realized he was doing that at first?
Probably not. But he had this aha moment like, wait a minute, something needs to change.
Mhm.
That's when he started focusing on himself, tackling those insecurities. And guess what? Why? He
He
ends up in this great relationship with a woman named Samantha.
Good for him.
And he admired her for her character,
Huh.
not just because she's giving him a ton of attention.
That's awesome. So he went from seeking validation to wanting a true connection.
You got it. But it all started with that self-awareness. So ask yourself, are you repeating any patterns in your dating life?
That's a good question for everyone listening. And here's where things get really interesting, I think. The book talks about the spiritual side of dating. They even say to take God on a date.
Wait, what? Like literally bring God along?
No, not literally.
Right.
It's about making faith part of the conversation, not being afraid to talk about those deeper things, spirituality and values.
So don't shy away from the big questions.
Right, like find out about each other's spiritual journeys. How did their faith develop? What do they believe now? And are your values aligned on those big issues?
Big issues. Like,
Like theology, purpose in life, finances, family, even views on social issues, stuff like that.
they really want us to get down to the nitty-gritty.
They do. And they talk about spiritual autonomy, too.
Spiritual autonomy.
It's like, is your date growing in their faith for themselves? Or do they feel like they have to for you?
Oh, that's a good distinction. You don't want to be anyone's spiritual crutch.
Exactly. So what about when there are differences? Is that a deal breaker?
Not necessarily. It's healthy to have different perspectives, even learn from them. But they talk about fundamental compatibility.
Okay, fundamental compatibility.
Are your core beliefs aligned enough? Enough to build a life together? That's the question.
It's finding that balance, respecting differences, but also recognizing when they're just too big.
Exactly. And they do give a warning. Don't get involved with someone who has, like, major character issues or who is spiritually stagnant thinking, oh, they'll change for me.
That's a recipe for disaster.
Right. You can't force someone to grow. It has to come from within.
Now, switching gears a bit, they have a whole section about how dating won't cure a lonely heart.
Oh, that's so true.
So many people try to use dating to fill a void.
They're looking for someone to complete them.
Right. So how do we know if loneliness is driving our choices?
They point out some signs. Consistently going for the wrong partners.
Yeah.
Being unable to be alone. Smothering your date with your needs.
You're placing this huge burden on them.
Right. And their advice: focus on building a support system outside of dating. Find fulfillment in other areas of your life.
So create a life you love, and then dating is like the icing on the cake.
Exactly. You come to the relationship as a whole person, not looking for someone to fix you.
And speaking of finding the right person, they have a whole chapter on friendship.
Friendship?
They say never fall in love with someone you wouldn't be friends with.
That's interesting. Because we can get so swept up in the romance, you know.
I know. But they talk about this split that a lot of people experience.
What split?
They're super attracted to people who are bad for them, but overlook the good ones.
Oh, yeah. The bad boys versus the nice guys.
They even share this funny anecdote about a radio show where they were debating the two types of men.
That's classic. So why do we do that?
Well, they say it often comes from deeper issues, like family stuff, or trying to find those missing parts of ourselves in someone else, or even romanticizing, not seeing the reality.
So we're not really seeing the person for who they are.
Exactly. They challenge us to ask, would I actually enjoy this person's company even if there wasn't a romantic element?
That's a good one.
Because friendship should be the foundation of any romantic relationship.
I like that. Shared laughter, common interests, that goes beyond just the physical.
Right. It's that deeper connection. And they also warn against ruining a good friendship.
Ruining it.
Or trying to force it into something romantic when it's just not there.
Oh, yeah. Don't force it.
They tell this great story about Ted and Ellen. They were best friends, tried dating, but realized it wasn't a fit. So they went back to being friends. Wisely.
Yeah. Sometimes the best way to honor the connection is to let it be what it is.
Absolutely. They talk about all the reasons people try to romanticize friendships, like thinking romance is somehow better, or falling into those rescuer roles, or just needing a thrill.
It's about being honest with ourselves. What are we really looking for?
Exactly. And they give some advice. Seek feedback from other friends, develop some self-control, and really understand the difference between connection and neediness.
It's about knowing yourself, right?
It is. And knowing what you want in a relationship.
Now, what about the whole opposites attract thing? What do they say about that?
They actually start by saying that having different strengths can be a good thing.
Okay, yeah. Like you complement each other.
Right. Like one person's organized, the other's spontaneous. They balance each other out.
Sure.
But, and this is a big but, they say oppositeness shouldn't be the only reason you're attracted to someone.
Oh, interesting. Why not?
One danger is mistaking dependency for love.
Dependence.
Yeah, like you're drawn to what you lack. But if you're relying on them to fulfill those needs instead of working on yourself, that's trouble.
It creates an imbalance.
They tell the story of Lindsay and Alex. She was drawn to his strength, seemed like a good complement to her more passive nature.
Right.
But it actually masked her own need to grow in those areas.
She needed to work on herself.
Exactly. So why are we attracted to people who are so different from us?
Well, on a healthy level, we're naturally drawn to what we lack. We want to learn and grow.
We want to expand our horizons.
But sometimes it's deeper, right? It's fear, it's laziness. You don't want to face our own stuff.
It's easier to project it onto someone else.
Exactly. So they ask us to be honest. Are we truly seeking growth? Or just a quick fix?
That's a good question. And I think it leads into their next big point about commitment.
Commitment.
They're really big on not rushing into things.
Yeah, take your time.
Especially marriage. They say it's a huge decision. Don't rush it.
So why do people commit too quickly?
Well, they talk about loneliness, obviously.
Right, trying to fill that void.
And a lack of experiences outside of dating.
Like they haven't really lived their own lives.
Exactly. And immaturity. They haven't developed the skills to assess character.
So what's their advice?
Build a fulfilling life outside of dating. Slow down the pace. Don't ignore those red flags. And listen to your friends.
Friends are important.
They are. And speaking of friends, they have a whole chapter on the importance of community.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
They share the story about Debbie. She got so wrapped up in her relationship with this guy, Nick.
Uh-oh.
He turned out to be, well, not great.
Controlling.
Yeah, and she had isolated herself from her friends.
So she didn't have that support system.
Exactly. And she ended up losing parts of herself in the process.
Ouch. That's a good reminder that we need those outside perspectives.
We do. Friends can give us that reality check.
They can see things we can't.
And they can support us in staying true to ourselves. So the message is, prioritize those friendships. Keep those connections strong. And don't sacrifice your life for a relationship.
Good advice. Now, what about hope? Like hoping someone will change.
They actually talk about that. They say change is possible, but it takes a genuine effort from the person who needs to change.
You can't force it.
Right. They have these two powerful questions they ask.
Whatever.
First, are you repeating the same patterns, hoping for different results?
Good one.
And second, is there a genuine reason to believe the future will be different?
Based on what you're seeing now.
Right. And they also outline some signs of real change to look for.
Like what?
Taking ownership of the issue,
Okay.
actively seeking help.
Therapy, support groups, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and demonstrating sustained change, not just a temporary fix.
It's got to be real.
And they tackle another common dilemma, the just friends situation.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is.
Yeah.
One person wants more, the other doesn't. What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do?
Well, they say, be upfront about your feelings, communicate clearly.
But also respect their boundaries.
Right. If they're not reciprocating, set boundaries on that more than friends' behavior. And be willing to walk away.
Sometimes that's the healthiest thing.
It is. It's about protecting yourself.
Yeah.
Now, they also talk about something that can really damage a relationship, blame.
Oh, the blame game. Never good.
They explain how blame shuts down intimacy. It creates defensiveness. It undermines vulnerability.
It's like building a wall between you.
Right, instead of a bridge. So what's the antidote to blame?
Well, they say look inward. Take responsibility for your own actions.
Don't just point fingers.
Exactly. Empathize with your partner's struggles.
Yeah.
And focus on solutions.
Not dwelling on the past.
Right. And they wrap up this section by talking about respect.
Respect is huge.
They share a story about Cindy. She overlooked her date's disrespectful behavior because she liked his other qualities.
We've all been there.
It's a reminder that we can't just compartmentalize character flaws.
Hoping they'll magically disappear.
Exactly. They say respect means feeling heard, valued, and safe.
Those are the essentials.
And they talk about how disrespect often gets worse over time.
It escalates if you don't address it.
So what should you do?
They say, communicate your boundaries, involve trusted friends, and set consequences.
Including being willing to walk away.
If the disrespect continues, yes, you deserve to be treated well, always.
And they also delves into how to set boundaries with those who have trouble respecting them.
The boundary busters.
Right. They say it's about discerning between genuine mistakes and character issues.
Is it a pattern or a one-time slip-up?
And reminding ourselves that healthy relationships are built on love, respect, and mutuality.
It's not about control. It's about creating a safe and empowering space for both people.
And they give practical strategies, like communicating clearly, setting consequences, and not just relying on breaking up as your only tool.
It's about finding that balance between compassion and firmness.
Right. Hold onto your boundaries while also allowing space for growth and change.
Now, this next part is important. It's about physical boundaries.
Okay, this is a big one.
They're very clear that physical intimacy is incredibly meaningful, and it shouldn't be taken lightly.
It's a big deal.
It's the deepest way to express love and commitment, and they believe it should be saved for marriage.
So they advocate for abstinence.
They do, and they give a lot of reasons to support it, both practical and spiritual.
It's about honoring that connection.
Yeah.
And not giving it away to someone who hasn't fully committed to you.
Exactly, and they share these powerful stories to illustrate their point.
Like what?
Well, there's Jenny. She got swept up in the moment and compromised her boundaries with this guy, Dave.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
Afterward, she felt terrible, guilty, confused. It just wasn't what she wanted.
It's so easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment.
It is. That's why it's crucial to be clear about your values and limits, even when things are, well, heated.
No matter what. And they also tell Josh's story, right?
Yes. Josh was committed to waiting for marriage.
Good for him.
But his girlfriend, Marty, she was putting a lot of pressure on him.
She didn't agree.
No, she thought it was no big deal.
It's hard when the pressure comes from someone you love.
It is. And what's interesting is Josh realized that her pushing those boundaries was part of a bigger pattern.
Oh, really? Like what?
She struggled with self-control. She had a hard time accepting no in other areas of the relationship, too.
It's like her pushing those boundaries was a warning sign.
Exactly. It
Right.
showed a lack of respect for his values.
So they're saying that how someone handles physical intimacy tells you a lot about them.
They are. It reveals their character, whether they truly respect you or are just focused on their own desires.
It's a good test.
And they talk about passionate lust and how it can cloud our judgment.
Oh yeah, lust can be blinding.
It can lead us down a path we regret. They're not saying all passion is bad, though.
Right, right.
But they emphasize that healthy relationships are about integration.
Integration. What does that mean?
It's making sure all parts of ourselves are working together. Our physical desires, our emotions, our spiritual values.
That sounds, well, complicated.
It can be, but they say it's about aligning all of those things. So sex becomes an expression of true love, not just a way to fill a void.
So it's not just about the physical. It's about the whole person.
Exactly. And they actually say that sexual abstinence outside of marriage can be freeing.
Free?
Yeah. It allows you to discover yourself without relying on sex to mask any insecurities.
You build relationships on something more substantial.
Right. And they say saying no to sex is a powerful way to assess someone's character. It shows if they truly value you or if they're just focused on themselves.
And no matter what choices you've made in the past, it's never too late to start fresh.
That's so true. God offers forgiveness and a clean slate.
That's a beautiful message.
Now, what about those boundary busters, those people who just don't respect limits?
What do we do about them?
Well, they encourage us to set up a detention hall, so to speak, for them in our dating lives.
A detention hall.
It's about recognizing those patterns of disrespect and addressing them head on.
Calling them out.
Right, and asking yourself, am I dealing with a character issue here or just immaturity? It's about discerning the root of the problem.
So you can respond in the right way.
Exactly. And they remind us, healthy relationships are built on love, respect, and mutuality.
The good stuff.
It's not about controlling the other person. It's about creating a dynamic where both people feel safe and empowered to be themselves.
And they offer those concrete strategies again. Communicating clearly, setting consequences, and not just relying on breaking up as the only option.
It's about having a range of responses.
And holding people accountable in a way that encourages growth.
Exactly. And they say, remember, you have the right to walk away if those boundaries continue to be violated.
You always have a choice.
Now, one final point they make is about being with someone who is committed to their own spiritual growth.
Okay, that makes sense. You're on a journey together.
Exactly. You support each other's growth and you hold each other accountable.
It's about becoming better people together.
That's what it's all about.
It's so important to remember, that they're not just like preaching here. They've worked with tons of couples, seen firsthand how much ignoring these principles can hurt.
Yeah, they're speaking from experience and a deep understanding of how people work.
Exactly. But before we move on, I want to go back to that empathy thing. When you're setting boundaries.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. It's not about being like cold or harsh.
No, not at all. It's about finding that balance, right? Compassion, but also firmness.
They really stress that in the book, empathizing with the other person's struggle, especially when they're trying.
When they're genuinely making an effort.
Right, like
Yeah.
that example they give, the woman setting boundaries with her boyfriend. He had a temper.
Oh, that's a tough one.
She knew it would be hard for them to be apart, but she held her ground until he was willing to work on it.
Work on his anger.
Yeah, get some help. It's about recognizing that change takes time and effort. And you got to support them, but also protect yourself.
Absolutely. You can't just be a punching bag.
Exactly. And you have to be patient, but also know when enough is enough.
Sometimes walking away is the best thing for both of you.
So true. Now, I'm curious, what do they say about boundaries with family? Not just dating.
Oh, that's a good question. Boundaries are important in all relationships.
Right. But family can be trickier.
It can. But those core principles, they still apply. Communicating clearly, setting limits, following through with consequences, the whole 9 yards.
So, if you have a family member who's always criticizing you, you might set a boundary like, if you keep talking to me like this, I'm leaving the room.
Exactly. And then you actually leave.
You got to follow through.
Show them you mean business. But what about parents? Setting boundaries with parents, that's got to be hard.
It is. It can feel almost impossible.
They talk about that. They say it's especially tough because of that power dynamic, but it's still important.
For your own well-being.
Right. And they have some tips for talking to your parents about boundaries.
Okay, like what?
They say, focus on your own feelings, not blaming them.
So instead of saying, you're always so controlling,
Right. You could say, when you try to make decisions for me, I feel disrespected.
it's about owning your experience.
Exactly. And it opens the door for a healthier conversation, hopefully.
And forgiveness, too, letting go of past hurts.
Forgiveness is huge. It helps you break free from those unhealthy patterns.
But it doesn't mean condoning bad behavior.
No, of course not. It's about releasing yourself from the bitterness, but it doesn't mean letting people off the hook.
It's about choosing to move forward, but with those healthy boundaries in place.
To protect yourself. Now, back to dating. What about social media? That's got to be a minefield for boundaries.
It is. It's so easy to get caught up in that online world.
So what do they say?
Well, first, they say take it slow. Don't rush to friend or follow someone you've just started dating.
Yeah, protect your privacy.
Right. And don't overshare too early. It's about building trust gradually.
Makes sense. And what about when you're together?
Put those phones away. Be present with each other. Give them your undivided attention.
No scrolling through Instagram while you're on a date.
Exactly. And they say resist the urge to stalk their profiles.
Oh, come on. Everyone does that a little bit.
I know it's tempting, but let the relationship unfold naturally and respect their privacy.
And don't make assumptions based on what you see online. It's not always the full picture.
So true. It's a highlight reel. And be mindful of what you post about the relationship too. Respect their privacy.
Good point. Don't air your dirty laundry online. Now, what about money? That's always a tricky one.
It is. They say be upfront about your finances, income, debt, spending habits, all of it.
Transparency is key.
No hidden surprises.
Exactly. And don't make any big financial commitments early on.
Like no joint accounts or co-signing loans until you're really sure about the relationship.
Makes sense. And talk about money as the relationship progresses. Figure out what works for both of you.
Because money can be a huge source of conflict.
Huge. They even give some practical tips, like creating a budget together, setting goals, making sure you're both contributing fairly.
It's a partnership after all. Now, what about emotional baggage? Everyone brings some to a relationship.
Oh, we all have baggage.
They say it's natural, but it's important to take ownership of it. Don't let it control you.
Don't let it sabotage the relationship.
Right. They encourage people to work on their own healing before getting into a new relationship.
Deal with those past hurts.
So you can approach the new one from a place of strength.
And be honest with your partner about your past.
But don't overshare too soon.
Right. Find the right time. And remember, your partner's not your therapist.
They're there to love you, not fix you.
Exactly. And if you need help processing those past experiences, seek professional help.
There's no shame in that. Now let's talk about those physical boundaries again. This is a big one, especially early on in a relationship.
They talk about how physical touch can be really powerful. You can build connection.
Right. But it can also be confusing or lead to situations that feel uncomfortable.
So set those clear boundaries.
And communicate them, what feels okay at each stage of the relationship.
So like early on, maybe holding hands and hugs are fine.
But you're not ready for more than that.
Exactly. And as the relationship progresses, you can expand those boundaries, but always move at a pace that feels comfortable for both of you.
And speak up. Say no if someone's pushing your limits, your body, your rules.
Always. Now, what about controlling behavior? That's a huge red flag.
It is. So how do we recognize it?
They define it as any attempt to manipulate or coerce someone.
To get them to do something they don't want to do.
Or to be someone they're not.
It's about power. One person trying to control the other.
And they give examples of those controlling tactics. Guilt trips, intimidation, isolation, even threats. It's not about love, it's about control.
And it's never okay. So what should we do if we see those signs?
They say set those boundaries and be direct. Don't make excuses for their behavior.
Don't try to rationalize it.
Hold them accountable. And talk to your friends and family. Get support.
Because it can be hard to see clearly when you're in it.
Right? And have a safety plan, especially if things escalate.
Knowing your options is crucial. Because you deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to feel safe.
Always. Okay, now this is something everyone dreads. Meeting the families. How do they say to handle that?
Well, first, don't rush it.
Don't introduce them too soon.
Give the relationship time to breathe. And when you do decide it's time, talk about expectations beforehand.
Like what's appropriate behavior-wise.
Right. And what topics are off limits, how to handle disagreements, just setting the stage for a respectful interaction.
Don't force a connection either. Let it happen naturally.
Exactly. And remember, it's okay if they don't become best friends. The important thing is mutual respect.
And focus on the positive. Celebrate the small victories. Even if it's a little awkward, try to find something to appreciate.
That's a good tip. Now, what about when you have different values, like really different beliefs?
Oh, that's a big one. Boundaries are crucial here.
Because it's okay to have different opinions.
But there are some things you just can't compromise on.
Exactly. So they say, be honest with yourself. What are your non-negotiables? What are those core values you absolutely will not budge on?
Know yourself first.
And then be upfront about those values with potential partners.
Don't hide who you are.
And once you know your own values, talk to your partner about theirs. Explore those areas where you align and those where you might clash.
It's about finding that common ground.
Or recognizing when it's just not there.
They compared to building a house. If the foundation is different, the structure won't be strong.
So make sure you're building on solid ground, shared values. Now, this next topic is a tough one. Past trauma. How do they address that?
Well, they acknowledge that it can have a huge impact on relationships. And they encourage anyone who's experienced trauma to seek healing.
To get support.
Right. And to communicate your needs clearly to your partner.
So if you have certain triggers, you need to let them know.
So they can be sensitive and patient. Because they might not always understand how to respond.
It's about creating a safe and supportive space together.
Where you can both feel heard. Now, what about dealing with addiction? That's a whole other level of complexity.
It is. And they make it clear, addiction is a disease. It's not a choice.
Right. And you can't control it.
You can't force someone to get help.
So detach with love. Your well-being doesn't depend on their recovery.
And set those boundaries. Be clear about what you will and will not tolerate.
Like, I won't spend time with you when you're using.
And seek support for yourself. There are groups like Al-Anon and Nar-Anon that can help.
You don't have to go through this alone.
Yeah.
Now, what about when people push back? When they don't like your boundaries?
That can be so discouraging.
It is. But they say, stay calm. Stay assertive. Don't let them guilt trip you.
Don't back down.
Remind yourself that you have a right to set boundaries. It's not selfish. It's healthy.
It's about taking care of yourself and the relationship, actually.
Because boundaries create healthier dynamics in the long run.
They also suggest offering alternative behaviors.
Instead of just saying, don't do that.
Give them a different option.
Right. Like, I'd feel more respected if you did this instead.
It's about being solution-oriented. Now, let's talk about something a little lighter. Gifts. How do you set boundaries around gifts?
Oh, that's a good one. It's easy to go overboard, especially early on.
So they say, be thoughtful, be intentional.
It's not about how much you spend. It's about the thought behind it.
Pick something meaningful, something that shows you know them.
Right. And don't use gifts to buy affection or make up for other problems.
Gifts shouldn't be a substitute for genuine connection.
And set limits on how often you give gifts and how much you spend.
Especially early on. Don't create pressure or expectations, and talk about your preferences.
Like, if you prefer small, thoughtful gifts, let them know.
Communication is key. Now, another tricky area is commitment. What happens when one person is ready to move faster than the other?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is. They say, respect each other's timelines, don't pressure anyone.
No ultimatums?
Right. Relationships move at their own pace, and have those honest conversations about your expectations. What are you hoping for?
Exclusivity, long-term goals, even marriage.
And really listen to each other. Try to understand where the other person is coming from.
Even if you don't agree. And focus on the good stuff. Appreciate the time you have together. Because sometimes you just got to enjoy the journey without putting pressure on the outcome.
So true. Now, this next topic is something a lot of people struggle with. Setting boundaries with people who, well, kind of take advantage.
Oh, yeah. The takers?
They might be really charming,
Yeah.
but they always seem to need something.
It's a tricky one. Because you want to be kind, be helpful.
Right. But you also don't want to be a doormat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the book talks about recognizing the difference between a genuine need and, well, manipulation.
Okay, how do you do that?
Well, they say pay attention to those red flags. Like, are they constantly asking for favors?
Yeah.
Do they always expect you to give? Do they guilt trip you if you say no?
So trust your gut.
Yeah. If it feels off, it probably is. They also say set clear limits on what you're willing to give.
And don't be afraid to say no.
Exactly. It's not selfish to protect yourself. And if they keep pushing those boundaries...
I mean, after you've communicated clearly.
Yeah, then it might be time to create some distance.
You can't change someone else's behavior, but you can choose to protect yourself.
That's right. Speaking of protecting yourself, they talk a lot about self-care.
Oh yeah, self-care is so important, especially in dating.
It's not selfish. It's essential. How can you pour from an empty cup? Right.
Exactly. So what does self-care look like when you're dating?
Well, it means prioritizing yourself, taking care of your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs.
So making time for those things that bring you joy.
Yeah. Nurture your soul, do things that make you feel good, and rested. It's okay to say no to things that drain you.
It's okay to set boundaries with yourself and with others.
Right. You deserve to be treated well, and you have the power to create those healthy relationships, starting today.
That's a great note to end on. So to wrap up this deep dive into boundaries in dating, I think the takeaway message is pretty clear. Boundaries are not about building walls.
No, they're about creating healthy connections.
They're about honoring yourself and what you deserve, and creating space for love and respect to grow.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, you have the power to create the relationships you desire. Just start by setting those boundaries.